The RCMP says it's suspending search efforts in the Yukon for the aerial object that was shot down back on February 11th. In a statement, the RCMP says the highest probability area has been searched and the debris was not located. Given the snowfall that has occurred, the decreasing probability the object will be found, and the current belief that the object is not tied to a scenario that justifies extraordinary search efforts, the RCMP is terminating the search. And joining me now to talk about this is Phil Gurski, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting and former Senior Strategic Analyst at CSIS. Thank you for joining us today.
Morning, Sean.
So, right away, do you think there's a serious threat posed by these objects?
What a great question for a Saturday morning. There seems to be some debate on what each of the objects were. There's no question the initial one that the Americans shot down off the Carolinas was in fact a spy balloon and was capable of either taking pictures or intercepting signals. For your listeners' information, I also worked in signals intelligence for 17 years in addition to CSIS, so I kind of know a little bit about signals collection. What this other object over the Yukon was, it remains to be seen if it was of the same nature of the balloon that the Americans shot down. If it was, then yes, it is highly possible that it was obtaining intelligence on in Canada for use by the Chinese government.
So what do you think could be the intent behind what we're seeing? Because it seemed to just pop up, very abruptly, several of them.
Yeah, another great question. I would say, Sean, this is just part and parcel of what I would call a renewed Chinese aggression in many Western countries. We've seen here in Canada the establishment of police stations, or so-called police stations, to harass Chinese citizens. I've seen personally harassment of Chinese Uyghurs and Chinese Tibetans to shut up against Chinese acts in those parts of their country. This didn't start last week, Sean, or the week before. It's been going on for a while. It's come to our attention because of the shoot down of the balloon off the Carolinas, but I think this is part and parcel of a campaign that's been going on for quite some time. And it's, coincidentally, we had that report in the Globe and Mail the other day about Chinese interference in our elections. So I think this is all illustrative of a very, very aggressive campaign by China to collect intelligence on our country for its own benefit, and certainly not for ours.
And when you focus just on the issues of our airspace, what kind of national defense issues do flying objects over international waters, over Canadian airspace, U.S. airspace, what does that cause?
Well, it causes a lot of concern. And just the other day, if memory serves me correct, we celebrated the anniversary of NORAD and of the distant early warning system that has been over North America since the days of the Cold War. My career goes back to the Cold War, and we were, very worried about one primary threat, and that was the Soviet Union and its use of nuclear and ballistic missiles. The threats are multiple. We do have military and law enforcement sort of standing on guard for thee in Canada, doing a fine job, but they're always at the highest readiness to try and figure out what's being sent over our airspace, what is it doing, what threat does it pose, and what reaction should we do when we find it.
Now, do you think this could cause any sort of change in that structure? Like you said, we've had this since the Cold War. It seems to have been working in the past couple of weeks, but it's also come to the forefront. People are talking about it, just like you and I are right now. Do you think that there could be a change in that level of security?
There's always a potential, Sean, that when something of this nature becomes public, like you said, you and I are talking about, everyone else is talking about it. This stuff goes on in the background all the time. But, human nature is that if something becomes much more prevalent in conversation, that maybe organizations such as National Defense, such as the Air Force, such as NORAD, may feel a little more pressure to do a little bit more and maybe disclose a bit more to the public to set their minds at ease that we're doing okay. When you work in intelligence, the last thing you want is to have your actions paraded on the front page of the CTV. No insult intended. But when it is, it certainly, I think, makes a lot of people wonder, should we be doing more? And if we need to do more, does that mean more money? And the Canadian government has been woefully inadequate in terms of supporting our military for many decades now.
An interesting point. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Phil Gurski, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting and former Senior Strategic Analyst at CSIS. Thanks for joining us today.